Okay, so this very short little mini lecture is about the idea of density and what density is. So I suspect you've heard this idea before. When we think about an object, we talk about its mass. We've talked about its weight. What we haven't yet talked about is sort of how those are related to how much space it takes up and what that means in terms of what we call density. So when we first introduced the idea of mass and weight, we distinguished those by suggesting that mass, remember, is sort of how much stuff the material has. So the fundamental makeup of the item that we are talking about, right? So how much stuff. And we identified the weight as a force, and that's kind of how gravity interacts with this stuff. Okay? So this idea of how the earth interacts with that object. We recall that that was the mass of that object times the constant g, so the acceleration due to gravity. Density talks about how much space that stuff makes up in relationship to its mass. So it talks about the amount of mass per volume that that mass is taking up in that quantity that we know as density. So our density relationship is the mass per volume. It allows us to normalize a little bit in terms of relating objects to each other. So one object's mass per volume is going to look different than another object's mass per volume, but we can normalize them to the same volume to get a sense of their relationship in terms of their fundamental quantity of mass. Now we're going to use density particularly when we talk about the relationship of fluids and objects within a fluids floating and sinking. So very fundamental, the idea of density is sort of the amount of mass per volume in a space, so looking at mass relative to the amount of space it takes up, and it's calculated simply by taking the mass divided by the volume of the object. All right, good job.